Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the INFOWARS Nightly News. Today is Monday, August 27, 2012, and I'm your host, Aaron Dykes.
Tonight on the INFOWARS Nightly News, Aaron Dykes speaks with the American Small Business League President Lloyd Chapman about breaking evidence involving government fraud. Then, U.S. veterans are being forcibly committed to mental facilities as indefinite detentions increase across America. Plus, the unyielding conditioning of the public as eye scanning and GPS technology are rolled out into our airports and schools. All that and more on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
Well, the RNC convention is kicking off today in Tampa, and instead of focusing on the phony elections, the phony circus, the phony dog and pony show between supposed rivals Mitt Romney and Obama, instead focus is turned to the protesters, who as usual have been labeled anarchists and lawbreakers. Don't focus on the illegitimate political parties who have usurped our political processes and got in bed with the corporate interest and taken over everything we have, undermined the Constitution, and are now ruining our way of life and economy. No, let's blame a few provocateurs who are repeatedly found at all these events to be paid, usually police or military provocateurs, starting stuff up, wearing masks, just breaking a little glass, so that all protesters can be demonized, and then police can do things like harass people holding up signs with sticks they say aren't allowed. Let's just roll some of that video that includes the propaganda rollout leading into this RNC convention, getting ready to insulate the Republican Party, never thinking it could be what's illegitimate, but instead focusing on those outside the convention, raising questions.
The Republican National Convention in Florida just days away now. The city of Tampa is bracing itself for a possible hurricane.
Isaac certainly isn't the only potential threat authorities are watching in Tampa. The other serious concern, anarchists.
The Department of Homeland Security and the FBI announced on Wednesday there's the potential for attacks by anarchist extremists at the convention in Tampa.
They are called the Black Bloc. They are anarchists bent on causing trouble and disruption with fights, vandalism, and rioting.
There's no doubt that there's a small percentage that will come here bent on destruction and disruption.
We have to deal with lawbreakers, with anarchists who have nothing to do with voicing an opinion. They're just going out and destroying property and breaking the law and battering officers.
What is the latest on the potential for anarchists to show up in Tampa?
Intelligence bulletin obtained by CNN warns of violence by anarchists.
And so you get the idea. Once again, it's about branding the protesters as violent, anarchist, outside of law, when most have nothing to do with that. Of course, you do get a few bad apples, but here the convention has dodged the natural disaster of Hurricane Isaac and instead created this manufactured disaster of against the protesters, never questioning the RNC. And this police state is now totally typical of all these political party conventions. You're going to see a similar police state presence at Charlotte because they know there's a lot of people dissatisfied with Obama, dissatisfied with Romney, and the entire political spectrum, the entire direction the country is headed. Everybody knows what a farce this is, so they've got to corral those who are raising questions, raising signs, keep them out of the media eye, and make sure they're branded as bad people. This has been going on since at least 1968 outside the Democratic Convention in Chicago, where police ended up beating a number of the demonstrators because they supposedly got out of hand. But this is exactly like the G20 meetings. No one could question the illegitimacy of what's going on inside and all the bad deals happening. It's just about the people outside. And this ties in once again with the ongoing agenda that Homeland Security has been rolling out at least since 2009, really dates back more than a decade, to labeling all types of Americans as potential domestic extremists. And at the top of that list is absolutely the returning veterans. There's a new plot that's been busted up. They're now being prosecuted in court. It's the anarchist militia, which has entirely military recruits, and supposedly among their other plans were plans to assassinate Obama and overthrow the government and other made-up fantasies, just like you see from all the Muslim terrorists who've been accused of doing things including poisoning the state's apple crop, plotting to bomb a dam, bombing a Forsyth Park fountain, and taking over Fort Stewart. Yeah, these are things that could really be done by a couple of knuckleheads with guns. Now, that being said, they are accused of murdering some of their own militia members to keep them quiet on this supposed plot. This whole thing already stinks of a manufactured patsy modus operandi that fits everything we know. That's because they've been completely demonizing the returning veterans. On the one hand, putting them into that PTSD corral where they lose their rights to own guns and to speak out against the government, and they're going to be thrown in the loony bin. We'll get to that story, but you've heard some of those reports from last week. But, gee, do you think this group could be part of a PSYOP? Well, their name is FEAR, F-E-A-R, short for Forever Enduring, Always Ready. And apparently they were going to overthrow the entire government and take out Obama. Well, that's what they want you to believe. We'll see how the facts pour in, but it absolutely fits into their propaganda meme. There was that 2009 key Homeland Security report where they said returning veterans were going to be the threat. Lone wolves were going to be the threat. It's white al-Qaeda. It's no longer Muslim extremists and jihadists trying to get inside our country. No, now suspicion has to be turned on all Americans. And, of course, they're warning veterans and active duty military to look out for other suspicious people in their units, to break up that unit integrity, to further divide the troops amongst themselves, because they know that those are otherwise some of the strongest voices left in our country, some of the most patriotic people, and many of them well aware of what's going on in this country. This ties in, of course, to the Sikh shooter, who's also been accused of being basically a neo-Nazi type. He was tied to all these PSYOP operations and also came out of the military. Suzanne Posel, only a few days ago, had the key article, The Manufactured U.S. Veteran Threat Against Obama That Will Justify Martial Law, and cites how all of these supposed threats to assassinate the president all come from former veterans and also all come from at least alleged white supremacy groups and the supposed nexus points therein. And you better believe that the Southern Poverty Law Center and other usual suspects are there to talk this whole point up, but it's all part of a script. And that ties in, unfortunately, with the increasing trend we're seeing of returning veterans being targeted for their PST conditions, their other traumatic conditions, and they're using that as a pretext to take away their rights. You heard about the case of U.S. Marine Brandon Robb, who spoke out, said 9/11 was an inside job, made other comments about the Federal Reserve and the monetary system, and basically the direction our country's headed in that so many people are waking up to, but instead it was used as a pretext to persecute him. Now, the judge has so far overruled that, saying there really was no factual basis to detain him and confine him and otherwise take away his rights and label him as crazy. But there's been other cases. John Whitehead of the Rutherford Institute has received numerous reports from other veterans. They say they're being discriminated against, and at least one veteran in particular has lost his firearms. They were confiscated, and he was not charged with any criminal activity, any violent intention other than what they based off of his psychological profile. That's what you get out of these veteran hospitals and the way they treat our soldiers. So it's okay for them to carry weapons when they're being forced into 4th, 5th, 6th tours, put into that meat grinder where anybody would go crazy. And in particular, they're going crazy all the more because they know there's not a real mission going on. This happened during Vietnam as well. So many soldiers lost faith, lost their sense of duty and purpose because they knew all of this was bogus, based on lies, and basically our foreign policy has been hijacked, and a lot of these people don't want to serve these nefarious agendas, and we're seeing the unfortunate results roll out as the state wants itself to be the only power monopoly, wants to demonize legal firearm ownership, starting with the veterans, supposedly the heroes that we've all put yellow ribbons on our cars and heralded as great folks when they're serving overseas, but when they come home, different story. So, of course, we're seeing this script come to life where white al-Qaeda, where regular Americans, where Tea Party members, where returning veterans, they're all demonized at the exact point in time when the U.S. and its foreign policy allies are openly working with al-Qaeda, openly putting them in Syria, after they openly put them in Libya, and are openly backing them in part of this Arab Spring overthrowing regimes. Also, they can kick off a wider war with Iran and the major world powers. Pretty sick and disgusting. And of course, they're continuing with their other plan, no longer really looking for any real threats in airports, but just getting us acclimated to a total Big Brother state, total takeover of technology. And the plan they've had all along under Homeland Security since the very beginning, before 9/11, rolled out officially in the plans under the Patriot Acts 1 and 2 and all the other related legislation. And that is the Trusted Traveler Program, and part of it has always been iris scans, but we see fresh in the news today, as though it was just thought of last week randomly by a technology firm, is eye-scan technology the future of airport security? And they talk about A-Optics technology and their $42 million in research to try to identify passengers within seconds through an iris scan, supposedly scanning them through this database. Now, this doesn't protect anyone's safety, as I'm sure you can figure out. As I'm sure you realize, TSA is not there for safety. They're there for prisoner training, acclimation to this wider police state. If they wanted to profile people, they never would have let the suspected hijackers in on the visas during 9/11. They never would have let the underwear bomber on the plane, giving him State Department clearance to board without a passport. No, those facts don't matter. It's just about getting you to get into the system. And what's to keep someone with violent intentions from registering anyway under the Trusted Traveler Program? No, it's just about this new system. It's always been part of the plan, but now we're seeing it rolled out, being gradually accepted, and frankly, in a way, they like all the revolt against the pat-downs and the body scanners because it presents the false Hegelian option of this new Trusted Traveler Program's biometrics to be the only way you'll be allowed to travel in the future. All this was written about by the eugenicists and the other world domination schemers more than 100 years ago. But I'm sure no one's interested in all of that. Also in technology news, scientists have successfully hacked the brain to obtain private data. They say they've used off-the-shelf emotive brain technology, which costs a mere $300, and they're able to use it to basically elicit, at least in their practical principles, things like PIN numbers, memorize security numbers, passwords. It's all part of this familiar interface recognition inside the brain that they've learned to recognize. They call it the P300 signal, and they say that signal, the P300, is typically given off when a person recognizes something meaningful, such as someone or something they interact with on a regular basis. So you've got these researchers basically masterminding how to read your mind, and especially to gather some of the most sensitive data, the stuff we've all learned to memorize to access our various accounts online. Now that's all in danger with very cheap technology that obviously leaves it wide open to hackers and everyone else and governments who spy on us without warrants. Meanwhile, more prisoner training news. Austin kids, the latest to be tracked with GPS technology. They're doing rollouts in 9 schools here in Austin, Texas, where I live, as well as in San Antonio, Dallas, La Jolla. And this has already been done in places all across the country. They're going to carry a cell phone-like device that registers a GPS signal tracking each of the 1,700 students in this particular program at several intervals throughout the day. It registers them with a quote-unquote mentor who's going to check in with them and make sure they're doing what they're told. All of this erodes parental rights, not only to indoctrinate your kids with actual facts and knowledge from actual books instead of from government institutions with watered-down Big Brother rewritten history versions, but also to physically track you and treat you what public schools have long already felt like, well, a prison, where they also track prisoners. Of course, many of the prisoners out on parole and other release programs have already been forced to wear GPS bracelets, ankle bracelets, and the like. And now basically the other vulnerable populations, like students, are being met with this as well. You've seen them also push it with the elderly, who they say, you know, they could have loss of memory, they could have dementia, what have you, and get lost. And that's a way to find them again and keep everyone safe. Everything must be accepted because of safety. Well, we know what Benjamin Franklin said about that. Those who give up their essential liberty for safety will, of course, get neither. And Paul Watson adds to his report on the GPS tracking device how they've already put private surveillance cameras into homes in the UK. There was the episode of the school district in Pennsylvania where the laptops were spying on kids in their homes. Oh, why? To make sure they were eating right? To make sure they were doing their homework? This is getting really creepy, folks. We've got to say no to this, but instead it's just another step in keeping everyone safe. No big deal. All the parents signed off. Everyone has permission. Now, in fluoride news, Portland, Oregon is a major metropolitan city. It's been one of the last bastions holding out against fluoride. You've got a lot of activist people in Oregon, a lot of people aware of social issues, and certainly a lot of people opposed to fluoride. Although there's at least 2 key members of the city council there opposed to the fluoridation scheme, the mayor has joined in league with the other members of the council, and they are well on their way to pushing this through. That is, unless people stop them. They're going to vote on it in the near future. They don't have a date yet, but they've actually had a lot of controversy over the public water supply in recent years. On the one hand, they've been jacking up the rates, skyrocketing the prices of water and other essential wastewater and recycling utilities, but they've also been arguing over some of the largest and last remaining open-air water reservoirs in the country, saying those are unsafe because chemicals could get in, because dead animals could get in. And somehow the compromise there has been that to deal with these open-air reservoirs until they put in a new system to cover them up because of the danger, well, they're going to add another toxic chemical known as fluoride to help you, again, with your safety. Never mind those Harvard studies. Never mind the effect on the IQ. Well, you know what direction that's all going. We'll turn now to our quote of the day. It comes from former U.S. Senator George Malone. He said this in 1957 about the banking system. I believe that if people of this nation fully understood what Congress has done to them over the last 49 years, they would move on Washington. They would not wait for an election. It adds up to a preconceived plan to destroy the economic and social independence of the United States. And surely he was talking very closely about the rise of the Federal Reserve banking system, which was passed and implemented starting in 1913. But of course, some of the legwork was done before that. One of those patriots who spoke out against the system, but not for long, because we are still under their thumb, and it's time to fight back against them. We'll be back after this with Lloyd Chapman. Stay tuned. Keep watching the InfoWars Nightly News. We're growing bigger and stronger. We're adding reporters. What are you doing on your end? Are you using PlanetInfowars.com? How are you getting the word out? Are you in the streets? Are you confronting people with video cameras? Well, we're going to watch, and we're going to see, and we're going to cover your reports when they're good. Stick around now after the break. We'll be right back.
I really enjoy it when the globalists try to poison us, and, well, we resist them via a free market system. Hello, my fellow Info Warriors. Alex Jones here, introducing you to the ProPure family of gravity-fed filters. Now, you know that the globalists are filling our water with radioactive isotopes, fluoride, lead, mercury, arsenic. And one of the few systems that can efficiently and economically remove or reduce down to non-detectable levels these poisons are gravity-fed filters. And ProPure is the top of the line. Their filters are impregnated with silver, a natural antibiotic. On top of that, they're bigger, so they filter faster. You don't have to prime these the first time you use them. It's amazing. Go to InfoWars.com and click on the shopping cart link to see the entire family of these babies. Now, the fluoride they add to our water is so tiny that most filters can't cut it out. But ProPure has their system that will, again, reduce it to non-detectable levels, almost get all of it out of there. That's also available. And if you look at the different systems they offer, the ProPure Big Brush Finish is on a stand, so it's easier on a table or at your restaurant or wherever you have it to go up with a glass or a mug and fill it up. Then there's this big baby right here, the ProPure King large version. Got a lot of different options that come with it. Also, they have the ProPure Big, probably one of the best values out there. And of course, it's burnished stainless steel. And then what I use on my RV, something that's great for your hunting cabin or the back porch, is the ProPure Traveler. Small and portable, but packs a huge punch, cleans out all that garbage. They also have a glass sight spigot, so you don't have to take the top off and look in the bottom area to see how much water. You can see how fast it's filtering with this optional system. The globalists obviously are hitting us through our water. It's time to take control of our lives. It's time to not give our children and families these poisons, and these systems cut it down to non-detectable levels across the board. ProPure is the name. I only promote what I believe in. And I use ProPure in my home and my office. And I recommend that you check out the information on ProPure at INFOWARS.com. We already have the lowest price at INFOWARS.com on the ProPure gravity filter system. But when you add in the 10% off when InfoWarriors use the product code WATER at InfoWars.com, nobody can top it. So again, it's a win-win-win. Stop drinking the poison water. Checkmate the globalists when it comes to your health, and support InfoWars.com and the work we're doing here. You know, many revolutionaries rob banks and things and kidnap people for funds. We promote in the free market the products we use that are about preparedness. That's how we fund this revolution against the New World Order in our move to restore our constitutional republic and a spirit of 1776 worldwide. Check it out at InfoWars.com. ProPure, top of the line, #1, most powerful and effective and economical gravity-fed water system in the world. ProPure, available, discounted at InfoWars.com. Don't forget product code WATER to save 10%. It's the latest generation, years in development. ProPure is the name. Alex Jones here with a message that could revolutionize health in this country. Going back about a year and a half ago, I began to learn about the incredible health effects of longevity products. Aaron Dykes lost 92 pounds. We're going to show you some before and afters. Aaron, break down what happened, your story.
I've worked really hard with diet and exercise to try to lose weight, but I just didn't get the results. It just didn't happen. Then I saw what you were doing with InfoWarsTeam.com. I wasn't even trying to lose weight, but I got it because I wanted to feel better energy. I wanted that nutrition. Didn't even understand how that could kickstart my own weight loss goals, but the products did that for me. I found myself suddenly losing weight, more energetic, wanting to exercise, wanting to eat the right foods.
And they don't even advertise it as weight loss. I want to challenge our radio listeners to go to InfoWarsTeam.com. Sign up as a distributor and get wholesale pricing discounts at InfoWarsTeam.com.
We are back on the InfoWars Nightly News. We turn now to Lloyd Chapman, head of the American Small Business League at ABSL.com. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Chapman.
Thank you.
So we've got an election coming up. Obviously, the economy is one of the biggest issues around, and you've stumbled onto the story really no one wants to talk about, although it has been in the mainstream press, and that's the fact that small businesses are being kept from the kind of dollars that they're legally have been required to receive. And obviously, without a promotion of small business, we're never going to see true economic growth. It's just going to stagnate in those big corporate welfare circles that aren't really creating new jobs.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, break down some of the key issues for us on this.
All right. Well, most recently, I've seen on the news, I think it was last Thursday, the Congressional Budget Office came out and said that we're on the verge of another, economic meltdown. People are now starting to admit that Europe is in a depression. And the Census Bureau tells us very simply that small businesses are responsible for over 90% of all net new jobs. Small businesses employ over half of the private sector workforce, They're responsible for half the gross domestic product. 90% of U.S. exporters are small businesses. So it's beyond refute that small businesses are the engine of economic growth in America. Secondly, federal law says a minimum of 23% of all federal contracts should go to small businesses. That makes sense. Small businesses create, the overwhelming majority of all net new jobs. So it's a good idea to reinvest our tax dollars into the companies where most Americans work, where most of the gross domestic product is generated, over 90% of the exports and most of the new jobs. And yet for over a decade, we've seen over a dozen federal investigations that found that most of the money that by law should go to small businesses is being illegally diverted to the biggest corporations around the world, not just Fortune 500 firms in the US, but Rolls-Royce, British Aerospace, Finmeccanica in Italy with, I think, 76,000 employees. And about a month ago, it came out that the US gave, I think, $370 million in small business contracts to an arms dealer owned by the Russian government. And it's just almost impossible to get this story in the mainstream media because of all the pushback from the government.
Well, obviously, these firms getting all the no-bid contracts and the insider information on these contracts are loaded with lobbyists, which small businesses generally cannot afford to provide.
No, plus, the government has hired the biggest public relations firms in the world. We've done research and through the Freedom of Information Act, been able to get the documents that shows that the SBA, for example, hired an international public relations firm that specializes in crisis management. So they spent a lot of time trying to keep the story out of the media. About 3 months ago, I did an interview with CBS. And when the interview was over, there was a cameraman, the producer, and the reporter on the phone. And I told them, I said, this story will never be seen. I said, you can't do a story about this. You can't put Lloyd Chapman on national television talking about how the Obama administration is giving billions of dollars a month in small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. And they looked at me like I was crazy. Well, the story never ran. About a month ago, we worked with the Washington Post for over a month on this story. We gave them the names of people like Professor Charles Tiefer, who is one of the nation's leading experts on federal contracting law, to talk to, and Peg Gustafson, the Inspector General for the SBA. But they never ran the story. So I've been through this, gosh, probably 100 times over the last 10 years, where I work with a major media outlet on this story. And for a variety of different reasons, the story always gets pulled. And if the story does run, I had a piece run on NBC about 2 months ago here in Northern California. And if you watch it on YouTube, even though there's been a number of reports that say this is fraud, they call it vendor deception, false certification, or proper certifications. If you watch the NBC piece, it closes with 3 levels of disclaimers that there's no fraud. And yet, there's been a number of federal investigations that found fraud. So I've never seen this story done that didn't have the influence of the government, on it. So, my goal is to try to get someone from the mainstream media, to do this story. And someone should ask President Obama this question during the elections. That could be a great question for the presidential debate.
If they took real questions.
Well, I'd like to have someone ask President Obama why his administration is giving small business contracts to an arms dealer owned by the Russian government, for example. I'd like to see what he says to that.
But of course, we're dealing with a 2-party deception, a 2-party cover-up. Romney's a big part of this as well.
Yeah, in fact, it doesn't really matter to me who's elected. Whoever it is will still be controlled significantly by Fortune 500 corporations. And it doesn't matter if Romney's elected or Obama's elected. I know that they're going to keep giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. Even if it pushes America into a depression we won't recover from, for 20 years, because those people are the ones that run our government.
And they're prostituted out to them. What's been your reaction to Paul Ryan being picked as VP? He has the public image of someone who could reform the economy, but these are such deep-set issues, and there's so much avoiding of the real problems. I don't see any possibility for serious reform, but I'd like your take.
No, again, it doesn't matter. I've thought this through, gosh, how many administrations, 3 or 4, maybe 4. And it doesn't matter. It's all about, the corporations have so much influence in Washington. when you think about the people in America, if we were to poll the people of America and say, do you think that Fortune 500 firms should get federal small business contracts, I would say 100% of people would say absolutely not. And yet this has gone on every single day for over a decade, and no legislation or policy has ever been adopted to stop it. And it's very troubling. I'll tell you a story. Maybe I've told this story before, but about 2 years ago, I fell asleep on my couch one night watching television. I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was what looked like a BBC, CNN show. And there were 5 economists from around the world, I think Japan, Russia, France, England, someplace else. And 24 months ago, they said if the U.S. doesn't bring down unemployment, it's going to push the U.S. into another economic downturn, which will push the world economy over the edge into a worldwide depression. That was two years ago. The only way to cut unemployment is to start giving money to small businesses. Small businesses create over 90% of all net new jobs. The Kauffman Foundation came out with a study a couple of years ago, and they said small businesses have created 100% of the net new jobs since 1980. Conversely, that means Fortune 1000 firms haven't created one net new job in 30 years. So the only way to actually create jobs is to, try to give more government spending to small businesses. Of course, there's a law in place, designed to do that. But so what's funny to me is I think this issue has a lot to do with why U.S. unemployment is still so low. And it could be, this issue could be a contributing factor to pushing the entire world into a worldwide recession because it's based so much on the U.S. economy.
Right. So, Lloyd, I've got Bloomberg from February 2012 saying it's a $16 billion fraud. This is just over the contracts that were supposed to be awarded to small businesses. A, is that the real scale, or has that grown since, the number of dollars not awarded to small businesses? But separate from government contracts, what other factors in the economy are keeping small businesses from being able to do what they're supposed to be doing?
Well, I say it's about $100 billion a year, not 16. So I've seen individual companies getting as much as $1 billion a year in small business contracts. A few years ago, Titan Industries, a Fortune 500 defense contractor in San Diego, got $500 million. So in my mind, it's closer to $100 billion for a couple of reasons. The law says that small business should get a minimum of 23% of the total value of all federal contracts and subcontracts. The government says that the acquisition budget is around $500 billion. It's closer to $1 trillion. The Pentagon budget is, I think, somewhere over $500 billion. So they're lying to us about how much money they're spending, first of all. Second of all, the Obama administration came out recently and said they awarded, 22.7% to small businesses. But of the top 100 recipients, 72 were large corporations, including, I think, this Russian company. So it's just a complete, sham. In fact, I've had 2 senior SBA executives tell me in the last few years that the government's entire small business program is all smoke and mirrors. So solving that problem, which would be real simple, President Obama could do it with a 1-line executive order, which would say the U.S. will no longer report awards to publicly traded companies as small business awards. That would do more to create jobs than anything here President Bush ever did. But again, that's not going to happen because that's not what the Fortune 500 firms that pull the strings in Washington want. You talk about other problems facing small businesses. The government seems to be anti-small business. They talk a lot. You'll see Paul Ryan and Obama and Biden and Mitt Romney talk about small businesses. But when you look at what the government does, the Small Business Administration is the only agency in this country to help small businesses. There's 28 million small businesses. Again, we've talked about they create almost all the net new jobs. That agency has a budget of something like $700 million. That's ridiculous. I think the SBA budget is something like 1% of what the Pentagon budget is. That should be one of the largest agencies in Washington. When you have a country whose economy is based upon small businesses, and you've got one agency to service those small businesses. By the way, the SBA's staff has been gutted in the last 5 or 6 years, probably the last decade. Mm-hmm. But I put out a piece over the weekend that said that doubling the Small Business Administration's budget could help solve the deficit problem. And when you watch the news about the deficit, they talk about cutting spending and raising taxes. What they don't talk about is how can we increase revenue without raising taxes? A real easy way is to start channeling the proper amount of federal contracts to small businesses the law requires, and that would generate lots of revenue and really help cut the deficit. But again, I don't think that's going to happen.
By the way, you talk about 72 of the 100 companies you profiled being too big. What's the best working definition? When does a business stop being a small business and become these giant corporate entities?
I think everybody in America knows what a small business is if you ask them. Again, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, 98% of all U.S. firms have less than 100 employees. And I would say that's a good definition. By the way, 89% of all U.S. firms have less than 20 employees. So if you went to federal court and asked a federal judge to come up with a definition, I think a judge would probably say no more than 50 employees would be a small business. But I'll go ahead and go with up to 100. But quite frankly, a small business in America is a company with probably, you know, I think the average U.S. firm has something like 9 employees. But I think it'd be fair to say that a small business is up to 100 employees. But again, you see, gosh, I can't think of a Fortune 500 firm off the top of my head that has not gotten small business contracts. Microsoft, Dell, Apple, IBM, Sherwin-Williams, Marriott, Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop, Raytheon, you know. But everyone in America knows what a small business is, and it's certainly not Fortune 500 companies.
Sure. Now, you talk about the contempt from the government against small businesses. I don't know if we've had a greater remark in the rhetoric side of things than Obama, a month and a half ago, saying you didn't build that, his big gaffe, his unscripted moment where he kind of let out this contempt for people who've built their own businesses, tried to pave their own way, and is really heralding the age of big and bigger government.
Absolutely. You know, I endorsed President Obama for president, and he put my endorsement on the front page of his website. We worked with his campaign, and in February of 2008, he came out with a statement that said it's time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. Not only has he not done that, but a couple of years ago, his administration removed a field on the government's database of contractors, which was called the parent company Dun & Bradstreet number. And that's how federal investigators and people like me and journalists would use to see who really owns a company.
Makes it easy to hide a shell company.
So President Obama's administration made it easier for people to commit felony contracting fraud, made it harder for federal investigators and journalists to show that they're diverting small business contracts to large businesses. In fact, about a month ago, the Small Business Administration proposed a policy to give federal small business contracts to foreign-owned companies.
Now, when Fortune 500 becomes the biggest donors to the Romney campaign, to the Obama campaign, there's all this insider knowledge, no bid contracts. Obviously, this is not just money issues, but it's affecting policy as well.
Absolutely. In fact, you know, I wrote a bill called the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act about 6 years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And that's a bill that I think 100% of the American people would support. It's just going to stop the government from giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. And that bill will never be passed, I don't think. It doesn't have a snowball's chance of passing because the Fortune 500 firms that receive so much of this money, they control the congressional committees like the House and Senate Small Business Committee that you would have to get that bill through. But it's really disturbing, but it's having a dramatic negative impact on this nation's economy. And I would have to say that I would call the government anti-small business. I would call the United States government anti-small business. In fact, here's something I'll say that'll make a lot of people mad. If anyone watching this can think of a group that you think represents small businesses, call them up and ask them why they've never come out opposing the cut in the Small Business Administration budget, and ask them why they've never said a word about the diversion of billions of dollars a month in federal small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. So if you really look at who backs groups out there that hold themselves out as being small business organizations, I've never seen one that wasn't backed by Fortune 500 firms. So every group out there in America that holds themselves out as a national group to support small businesses is in truth funded primarily by money from Fortune 500 firms. So I don't think there is a legitimate small business group in America, quite frankly, other than the American Small Business League. Anyone that's mad about that, show me what you've done to stop them from giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. To put that in perspective, by the way, I think that's the single biggest issue that affects small businesses because it's the most money. And we're talking about probably $100 billion a year that small businesses should be getting. They're being diverted, to large corporations. But any group that claims to represent small businesses, if they were legitimate, would have gotten on board with this issue. But I don't think you'll find any national group that's done that.
The Republican convention's kicking off this week. We know what kind of circus and farce this staged election is about to be. We know the issues the corporate media are going to refuse to touch. But what is the short, simple message you would send out to the people about the incredible importance of small business to reviving the economy? How can we get this into people's heads to the extent that the alternative media now carries the message in a competing fashion with the controlled corporate media?
Well, I think, when I'm trying to be persuasive, I try to just stick to the facts. So the U.S. Census Bureau, if you look on their website today, they say that small businesses create over 90% of all net new jobs. Now, compare that with where the stimulus money has gone. Probably 95% of stimulus money has gone to Fortune 1000 firms that haven't created hardly any net new jobs in the last decade. So people need to realize this is a small business nation based upon a small business economy. And you will not see that mentioned on national television. You can sit there and watch national television all day long, and you'll never see Wolf Blitzer or anybody else from the mainstream media mention that fact. And until people start to realize America is based upon a small business economy, our economy is going to continue to struggle. And people need to get mad about this. People should be outraged about this. There's a lot of things people are mad about. But to me, this is something that people should really be outraged about, is how the government, how poorly they treat small businesses.
Lloyd, remind people where they can find your work, what your website is, and what issues you're going to be focusing on the most as this election comes up, as we try to speak some sense into a system that isn't prepared to listen.
Our website is asbl.com. You can go to YouTube and search on Lloyd Chapman and see all my appearances on your show and a lot of other shows. And I think my main focus until the election is to try to get someone from the mainstream media to cover this story and have someone ask President Obama one question, which is, why is your administration giving federal small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms and an arms dealer owned by the Russian government? I'd love to see President Obama answer that question on national television. I'd love to see people ask Mitt Romney, if you're elected president, will you end the Obama administration policy of giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms? I'd love to see what Mitt Romney would say to that.
There you have it. Lloyd Chapman, thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you again in the future.
All right.
That's it for the INFOWARS Nightly News tonight, but it's a no-brainer. Controlled economies are destructive and despotic, and people die from them. Small businesses are the spark that made America great. You just heard Lloyd Chapman on it. Do your own research. It's true throughout history. We'll be back again tomorrow. Thanks for watching the INFOWARS Nightly News. Don't forget about PrisonPlanet.tv, where you can support us financially, but also get the information, the tools, the videos to spread to other people to help wake them up. That's what we need more than ever. And of course, PlanetInfowars.com. It's growing. People are posting contents. They're fighting the InfoWar their way. They're reaching people in their niches, in their parts of the world, and in their common interest pools. And that's how we're going to win this war, all together, doing our own part for liberty, for truth, in a decentralized manner, globally, people, globally. Thanks for watching. Good night.